The Black Sheep's Journey. I once believed everything adults said was true. That if a teacher told you to do something, you didn't argue. If your parents said to stay quiet, you didn't ask questions. If everyone was laughing, you shouldn't find it unfunny. When I was 10, in 5th grade, I had a literature teacher the whole school respected. She didn't yell, but her gaze could silence a class of 45 kids in seconds. I sat at the third desk by the window, close enough to hear clearly and far enough to breathe when it felt stifling. It was a cool October morning, the sunlight not yet harsh. Our teacher asked us to read The Adventures of Cricket and write a short paragraph about the lesson learned from the character Demin. The class scribbled away. I stared at the ceiling, thinking not because I didn't understand, but because something felt off. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, holding my paper, and said, I think Demin doesn't really grow up after his journey. Even after apologizing to Decho, he's still arrogant. He only sees what he wants to see. I wonder if he truly changes or just thinks he's righter than before. The class turned to stare. A soft laugh came from the back. Someone whispered, "What? A literary critic now." The teacher stayed silent, her eyes narrowing. My heart pounded, but I stood tall. Then she spoke, slowly, clearly. You're overthinking. Children should just follow instructions, not analyze so deeply. Don't analyze deeply. Don't ask too much. Don't question everything. I sat down. My paper now crumpled at the edges. That day, I didn't tell anyone. At home, I opened my little locked diary and wrote. On the first page, was I wrong just for seeing things differently? From then on, I wrote more not to stand out, but to hold on to the growing part of me that adults called too much. I stopped speaking up in class. When the teacher asked questions, I stayed quiet. I learned to be punctual, obedient, reasonable, all the things that blend you into the crowd. But inside, I was never still. I kept questioning, just silently. Why must we stand at attention when no one's watching? Well, why can adults yell, but kids can't raise their voices? If everyone's the same, what's real? I feared being seen as odd, dreaded the half-smirking, half-pitying looks from friends, but my greatest fear was becoming someone who no longer asked questions. In 7th grade, a midterm exam asked, write a paragraph about your feelings for your family. I wrote that I didn't feel close to my parents, that we lived together like housemates, not a family. Dinners were spent with phones, not chopsticks. I wanted to hear, how do you feel, instead of, what should you do? I wasn't criticizing, just describing. I got a 610 with the comment, not aligned with the expected emotional tone. I asked, teacher, what's the expected emotional tone? She replied, you should write so readers feel love for your family, not sadness or distance like you described. I nodded and stopped writing. Honestly, I learned to feel correctly, but some things can't stay hidden. In 9th grade, at a school event called Planting Dreams, I volunteered to speak. I want to be a storyteller, not for fame, but to let the world hear things kids are told not to think about. No one laughs. A few clapped, but I remember a girl in the front row staring unblinkingly. After, she whispered, "Thanks. I've been told I think too much too." In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I grew up with many twos. Too sensitive, too deep, too quiet, too questioning. People called me off standard. I tried to fix myself, laughing on cue, praising the right people, saying just enough. But each time I tried to be like others, I drifted further from myself. Looking back at that 10-year-old morning, and I'm no longer angry at my teacher. I only pity her. Perhaps she, too, was once like a child told she was too much. If you've been called strange, different, or the black sheep, know this: you're not wrong. You're the first to pause and look. You're brave enough to ask what the herd stopped questioning long ago. In a noisy world of sameness, people like you are the needed echo. Embracing difference. I realized I was different in high school. A time when everyone craved belonging. Kids wanted to dress alike, talk alike, love the same bands, games, and apps. I didn't hate it, I just wasn't interested. I tried to fit in. I listened to trendy music, nodding along to shallow gossip to avoid feeling left out. I wore a slogan hoodie and saved all summer for branded sneakers. But each time, I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin. I liked silence not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted to understand before speaking, to feel before agreeing, to know why before following. At school, this made me an outsider. During breaks, while others buzzed about crushes or TikTok trends, I'd take my notebook to the library's back courtyard, where an old soursop tree shaded a mossy stone bench. There, I felt real, no acting, no forced smiles. Once, a classmate asked, "Why are you always alone?" I smiled, about to answer, when she sighed, "You're so weird, but guess you like being quirky." Quirky. Two words that echoed in my head all afternoon. At home, I wrote in my notebook, "Am I quirky for not enjoying pretense, for not wanting to be a faint shadow in a crowded picture?" I thought hard, then added, "If being true to myself is quirky, the world needs more quirky people." My difference wasn't just solitude, it was questioning what others took for granted. When friends talked about someone being kicked out of a group for saying something unpopular, I asked, why can't we listen without agreeing when our class split into presentation groups and everyone picked safe topics like environmental protection or social media? I suggested, let's talk about feeling isolated in a group. Everyone here's felt it at least once. The group fell silent. One said, "That's too heavy." Another added, "I don't want people thinking we're weird." Weird? Another label stuck to me. I learned there's a price for not blending in. You're not invited out. You're left out of private group chats. You're tagged as strange or trying to be special. The worst wasn't being misunderstood. It was when I began doubting myself, standing before the mirror asking, am I wrong for not enjoying what's called normal? But each time I nearly lost myself, something small pulled me back. A poem, a song, an old diary entry, A quiet moment when afternoon sunlight filtered through leaves, making the world gentle and clear. One late autumn afternoon, our class threw a farewell party for a friend transferring schools. Music blared, laughter filled the courtyard. I stood at the edge, holding a soda, watching her the one leaving. We weren't close, but I knew she, too, had sat alone in the library. She'd once said, "I like quiet, but here, quiet feels like punishment." I approached and silently handed her a folded note. Inside, I'd written, "Thanks for being the first to sit by when others left. May you find a place where quiet isn't a fault." She said nothing, just hugged me tightly. That was when I realized my difference wasn't just a burden, it could be what someone else needed. That night, I wrote, "I may be quirky, I may not fit the crowd, but if I can make one person feel less alone, maybe quirky is a gift." From then on, I saw quirky differently, not as criticism, but as a sign I was true to myself, even if the path was less traveled. Choosing my path. When I chose my college major, my family gathered not to celebrate, but to dissuade me. Dad said, "Art won't feed you. Mom looks sad. Pick something stable. Work in an office, make us proud." My cousin, a recent economics graduate, added, "You'll regret it when your friends have steady paychecks and you're chasing dreams." I stayed silent, sitting like a guest at a party I wasn't invited to speak at. I still applied for design and fine arts, not to rebel or show off, but because holding a pencil to paper felt real, unlike trying to be reasonable. I didn't dream of fame or glamour. I just wanted a life where I didn't wake each morning wearing someone else's shell. The cost was steep. While friends in hot majors interned at banks and corporations praised as promising, I worked at a cafe, mopping floors after classes, drawing portraits for less than 50,000 VND, scrolling through friends' posts about new jobs, sleek offices, and friendly colleagues. I felt a pang, not envy, but doubt. Am I too different to survive this world? One day, I submitted a design for a small school competition, pouring 3 sleepless nights into it. At the submission desk, the organizer glanced at it and said, "You get. Your major's unrelated. Why bother? Think you'll win." I smiled, said nothing, and left. That night, I tore up all my sketches, exhausted from swimming against the current. Days later, an email arrived. My work made the top 10, not because the judges loved it, but because one said, "There's something honest in these lines." Not for show, but to say what hasn't been said. I froze, not from joy, but from realizing that even if the world doesn't get you, one person seeing you can be enough to keep going. I returned to drawing not to win, but to stay true. I chose topics no one touched: silence, fleeting moments, emotions the modern world rushes to ignore. My friends graduated with honors. I took an extra year, dropping required courses to pursue personal art projects. At graduation, no family came. My parents said, "You chose this, so deal with it." I stood alone, holding my diploma like a ticket no one wanted. But I didn't cry. that diploma wasn't proof I was better, it was proof I hadn't abandoned myself, despite the world calling it a mistake. A quiet rebellion. After graduation, I entered the adult world with a portfolio, a few self-printed designs, and a heart still believing sincerity would open doors. It didn't. I knocked on 27 doors, applied to 27 companies, studios, and nonprofits, hoping for a small start. No callbacks, no rejections, just silence. A silence that made me doubt myself. One rainy morning, waiting for a bus with a soggy sketch, a middle-aged man beside me asked, "Why draw?" These days, people need engineers, doctors, not artists. I didn't argue, just smiled and nodded. I'd heard it too often from family, strangers, the world, and sometimes myself. I lived in a tiny shared room with 2 students, a creaky bunk bed, and a corner desk for my laptop, drawing tablet, and teapot. I took freelance gigs, wedding invitations, yearbook photos, posters for small shops. Not my dream job, no fame or contracts, just last-minute cancellations, unpaid work, and 3 deadlines. Yet, I never felt as empty as during a month-long internship at a corporate office with air conditioning, free coffee, and endless talk of KPIs and quarterly goals. There, I faded, my inner voice drowned by keyboards and deadlines. One day, I did something bold. I held a small exhibition, renting a corner of a familiar cafe, printing art with 3 months' savings, hand-gluing posters, writing invitations, setting lights, and arranging old plastic chairs. I knew few would come. No lines like at famous openings. But I did it to prove to myself I didn't need permission to exist. On exhibition day, only 4 people showed: my 2 roommates, a curious stranger, and my mother. She stood silently before a painting, jagged lines and scratched colors I'd made at midnight. I didn't explain. She turned and said softly, "You still hold such storms inside, don't you?" I nodded. She hugged me, saying no more. I thought the exhibition failed. But 3 days later, the stranger, Lynn, messaged, "I didn't get all your art, but one piece made me cry. It felt like being lost in my own family, unseen." I read it 3 times, then sobbed, not from sadness, but because I knew I wasn't wrong to choose this path. One person seeing was enough. I stopped mass applying for jobs, instead creating my own space, a website, introducing myself through stories, not accolades. I blogged about the hidden emotions young people bury. Few read, but those who did wrote, "I see myself in you." I realized some doors never open because they weren't built for you. They're for those who stay quiet. Smile just enough. Take the easy road. But you don't break those doors. You find a blank wall and build your own. Daring to be hated. One rainy afternoon, at a small, used bookstore, I found a book that stopped me. The Courage to be Disliked. I flipped through, not planning to buy, but the first pages froze me. A line pulled me back to years of being misunderstood. True freedom is living without needing to be liked. I sat on a wooden chair by the wall, rain pattering outside, and read half the book not from leisure, but because each line spoke for me, the child labeled different, who tried to fit in and broke, who chose the hard path rather than live falsely. A principle woke me. Separate task. I'm responsible for my actions, choices, and life. Others' feelings, approval, or judgments are their task, not mine. I'd spent years fearing others' displeasure, tweaking art to fit unconvincing feedback, changing how I spoke, dressed, even laughed to be more likable. Each night, stripping it all away in the mirror, I no longer recognized who stared back. When the book's character said, "People don't live to please each other, but to be true to themselves," I closed it and sat for ages, feeling someone from another world had taken my hand, whispering, "You're not crazy. You're living right." That day, I revisited rejected drawings, not with shame for others' dislike, but with the original truth I'd poured into them. I realized no one can measure your worth with a universal ruler. You weren't born to be the average. I rewrote my social media bio. I draw for those who feel they don't fit the world. I deleted minor achievements listed for a polished profile, sharing instead raw diary entries, unfinished sketches, unclosed emotions. Strangely, when I stopped trying to be liked, I began to be seen not by crowds, but by those who needed what I offered. A high schooler messaged, "Your imperfect drawings gave me courage to pick up a pencil after 3 years." I cried, not from sentiment, but from seeing something greater than fame or money impact. Quiet impact, like a small flame warming someone enough to keep going. One afternoon, my mother called, not to ask about money or stability, but to say, "I read your post about daring to be disliked. I pushed you to follow what I thought was right because I feared disapproval. Now I understand. Thank you." I said nothing, eyes stinging, knowing I'd won a silent 20-year battle, even if no one else acknowledged it. I wrote on my whiteboard, "I don't need to be liked. I just need to not betray myself." It reminds me when I'm tempted to please others, keeping me from chasing false lights. I once thought freedom was going anywhere, doing anything. Now I know it's living true. No roles, no stifled sighs, no looking over my shoulder before being myself. If the price of that freedom is being hated, misunderstood, or called too different, I'll pay it. The last thing I want is to leave this world without ever truly living. A bridge for the loss. At 29, I opened my first art class, not in a fancy studio, but a rented room in a district cultural center with peeling paint, rickety tables, and creaky windows. I didn't advertise loudly, just posted for anyone afraid to draw because they were told they're not good enough. No glossy images, no promises of success, just an invitation. Come and tell your story through lines. The first class had 4 students, an 8th grader who failed a district art contest, a tech student who said, "I draw for fun, but it's bad," a 35-year-old single mom who shyly admitted, "I loved painting but gave it up," and a 10-year-old with social anxiety who only said, "I like purple." I didn't start with technique. I gave each a blank sheet and asked, If your emotion were a shape, what would it look like? They hesitated. One drew a broken circle, another a tangle of lines. The 10-year-old drew a long purple streak, shapeless, stretching corner to corner. I didn't correct or critique and just said, "This is real. Real doesn't need to be beautiful." The 6-week class had no grades, no one better than another, only growing courage in each stroke. In week 3, the 8th grader drew her mother's portrait, a sad face, eyes averted. Showing me, she said, "This is my mom when she cries," but no one knows. I choked up not from technique, but from the honesty only a hurt child could capture. In week 5, the 35-year-old brought a watercolor, her first in nearly 20 years. "I thought I'd abandoned art," she said, "but it was waiting for me to be brave enough to return." We didn't clap, just nodded silently, knowing that drawing yourself is a longer journey than any skill. I realized no one truly can't draw. They'd been hurt by words like ugly, childish, or do something practical, closing the door that could have been their escape from sadness. I thought I was just the black sheep, unfitting, misunderstood. But through each class, I saw my difference could be a bridge, not a grand one for crowds, but a small one for lost souls like me to find each other and know I'm not the only one. I taught them to observe emotions, not to explain, but to listen. I didn't demand beautiful, only true. Each time a student looked at their work and said, "I didn't think I could do this," I smiled. I'd been them. I knew once you see yourself in something you made, you're no longer invisible. At the course's end, we held a small exhibition in the classroom. Each chose one piece to display, not for sale, but to share. We invited friends, family, neighbors. When someone asked, the 10-year-old, now drawing more shapes and colors, "Why is your sky orange?" He hesitated, then said, "Because that day I was sad, but still wanted to hope." I turned away, eyes burning. No one needed to fully get his painting. It was enough that he understood himself. That night, alone in the darkened room after cleanup, I thought of grand classrooms, famous galleries, and dazzling exhibitions out there. Then I looked at this place, flaking walls, scratched tables, lingering oil paint, and I knew I'd built my first bridge. A quiet one, not for crowds, but strong enough to hold those who felt invisible, giving them a place to stand, draw, and live. Owning the label. I once hated being called the black sheep, mocking label for the disharmonious, non-compliant, unlike anyone. I tried to peel it off, to live lighter, milder, fainter, to not bother others with my difference. But after countless closed doors, skeptical glances, and moments asking, "Is it worth it?" I understood no one gets to assign me a role. If I'm the black sheep, it's because I chose it, not because I was cast out. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at an art workshop for teens on finding your voice. I brought no slides, no techniques, just stories I'd once hidden, being called too much in elementary school, tearing up drawings, feeling useless, being mocked, or left behind for being arrogant. I looked at the young faces below, not a crowd, but fragments waiting for someone to say, "You're not broken, you just haven't been named right." I told them about my small class, imperfect but heartfelt paintings, students who feared themselves but now dared to draw, write, stand not to win, but to exist. A girl asked, "Do you ever feel lonely going against the flow?" I nodded without hesitation. Yes, intensely. But loneliness, for being yourself, is still easier than being surrounded by masks. That night, in the mirror where I'd once asked, "Am I wrong?" I saw someone standing firm. No need for validation, just a heart no longer lost. I stopped trying to fit the crowd or bend to normal. I don't need to walk, talk, or live like others. I just need courage to be myself in a world teaching us to be copies. Strangely, by living true, though different, though lonely, I began reaching more people, not by fitting in, but by being real. A student sent me a handwritten letter. "You're the first person I met who didn't teach me to be like someone else. You just listened. Because of that, I dared to tell my story without editing. I keep it in my wallet, a tiny talisman reminding me I don't need to be liked to make a difference. I just need to be honest." Now, when called the black sheep, I smile. I'm not angry. I don't need them to change the label, because I know the black sheep isn't an outcast. It's the one who pauses mid-herd, looks up, and asks, "Is this really the only path?" I don't walk to oppose anyone. I walk to not betray myself. I don't need to blend in. I was born to lead not the herd, but first, myself. You don't need to be like anyone to deserve love, respect, or opportunity. Difference isn't a flaw, it's the mark of an awakened soul. If you've been called quirky, stubborn, or unreasonable, you might just be ahead of your time. You're not alone. You're the first to see a new path. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Unflashy, but true. Leave a comment share when you realized you were the black sheep and how you bravely kept going. Subscribe to catch more stories because the next one might be yours.